And I went to 72 when I was president. I've been to way more than 100 since I left office. I work in places now helping farmers who farm as little as a quarter acre of land. I've been down rural roads. Literally took me an hour and a half to go 12 miles. So once in a while I still go to a presidential palace. But I like to be out in the country where I get my hands dirty. Here's what I know. Everywhere in the world, and everywhere in America, that people are doing well, it's because government and business work together. And often they work with groups like my foundation is now, this whole civil society, non-governmental sector. But cooperation and honorable compromise work better than constant conflict. They just work better. This deal that's being presented to us by a group that now controls the Republican Party doesn't work very well. And every time they've run it out in the last 20 years, it hasn't worked very well. And I frankly resent the fact that it's called conservative, because it's not. I promise you, the four people on this stage, we are way more fiscally conservative than the people they got running for president, vice president. As I said in Charlotte, we believe in arithmetic. How do you produce four balanced budgets, four surpluses? And well, actually, the balanced budget is pretty easy because we got rid of 90% of the debt in the 4 years we were whittling it down. But I said, you know, the arithmetic, I was, from Arkansas, and nobody had told me that when I went to Washington, 2 and 2 wasn't 4. I can't figure out how they get called conservative. If you look at what Joseph Poland said, I loved everything about Indiana's role in the Senate when you had Evan Bayh and Richard Clinton. Conservative. He thought a lot of stuff ought to be done at the state and local level or in the private sector that I thought the federal government ought to help in. He voted against it more than half the time. But when the interests of the country were on the line, we got together and we worked together. And when I saw this, primary of Joe Grace unfolded, where Senator Lugar's opponent was excoriating him for working with President Obama on national security matters. You really think that it's a Republican or a Democratic issue whether Osama bin Laden and a lot of the leadership of Al-Qaeda is gone now or not? I thought that was an American issue. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq is a lot of people lived through them who never lived through any armed conflict in history because battlefield medicine is so much better. The bad news is about 300,000 of them have varying degrees of brain injuries because they were hurt by these IEDs, what you call roadside bombs. And they have terrible percussive effects, and your brain's fairly fragile and it rattles around and then things aren't like they were before. I have no idea how many Democrats and Republicans are in that 300,000 group. But I know this, we owe it to them to do everything we can to give them a chance to start their lives. Some Republican came up to me and said, you know, Bill, I got a better idea here. You know, we could do this kind of outpatient service and we could serve more people for less money and have higher impact. We could ask every person with skills in this area, and all the medical personnel in America, would they just give us 2 hours a week of volunteer time so we at least had a comprehensive inventory and we knew what everything did. I wouldn't give a rip if the guy was a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, a Republican, a libertarian. I wouldn't care, and you wouldn't either. What is this idea that it's my way or the highway? I was raised to believe that nobody's right all the time. Now, maybe Mr. Murdoch is, I don't know. He's way right all the time. I know. And as I said, you know, a boat is right twice a day. So nobody's wrong all the time either. And the rest of us, we spend all of our fleeting lives between those two extremes. We know we're not going to be right all the time. We hope to goodness we're going to be right more than twice a day. Don't you think? So the idea that the government of the United States, facing the aftermath of a horrible financial meltdown, which went all over the whole world, and which is holding us back now, not just because of problems in America, but because of slow growth in Europe. Even the Chinese now are deliberately slowing their economy down because they're scared to death they're about to have the same kind of banking collapse we did. But somehow there is some theory untethered to any facts that we can force down the throat of every American who disagrees that will poof, magically make it all right. It's just not so. It ain't so. And the idea that Indiana, a state that sent Evan Bayh and Dick Lugar to the United States Senate, would send somebody up there to say it's my way or the highway, to say that there's no constitutional basis for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, is unbelievable to me. And especially if they don't believe in arithmetic. We kind of let it turn out the back last night. I don't know if you watched that debate, but you know, I kind of sympathize with Congressman Ryan. He's got to defend now Governor Romney's position that the $716 billion in Medicare savings in the president's budget that the congressman voted for is somehow a ripoff, even though it was in his budget too. And there's a reason, because it wasn't a cut. It was people saying the truth. They wanted all these doctors and all these folks. The American Medical Association endorsed it. The AARP endorsed it. Do you really think they'd be out in the business of wrecking Medicare? You think all the old users like me would still play their AARP games? If I thought that AARP was wrecking Medicare? So, but he got stand up there with a straight face and say all that stuff. But here's the deal. I'll say this one more time. A program called Medicare Advantage was started under President Bush. The idea was that if you wanted to, you could get an insurance company to give you preventive care and services as well as regular Medicare. To get the insurance companies into it, when they started, they paid them $1,100 to give $600 worth of services. Well, you can do nearly anything but rob a bank for that kind of markup. So beginning when President Bush was in office and the Republicans were in a majority, they started, as people enrolled, they started whittling down the profit margin. Because they realized that as soon as people saw they could afford to give these preventive services, and people stayed healthier, and the cost stayed down, you couldn't justify wasting the taxpayers' money on that kind of profit margin. So they got some new recommendations, which, as I said, the AARP endorsed, which said, there's enough people in this now, we can cut this profit margin down to about $1.14 for every dollar you spend on regular Medicare. And in fairness, the people that started said eventually it ought to be exactly the same, because you should have your people healthier and less costly. So we're getting toward that. Right? That's all they did. And when you cut the profit margin down that much, you still got a lot of business in Indiana killed for a guaranteed 14% profit every single day, every single month, every single year. But in everybody's budget before, they assume the higher cost. Once you say you're not going to spend that $716 billion, it keeps Medicare alive till 2024. Now, if you do that, then all these radical changes these guys are proposing in privatizing it become unnecessary, because it gives us more than a decade to see whether we can bring healthcare costs overall down to the rate of inflation. If we do, we won't have to do those radical things, because healthcare costs in the private sector have gone up way more than Medicare costs have. What you have to do is bring healthcare costs down to the rate of inflation we're getting. And by the way, in the last 2 years, healthcare costs have been under 4% 2 years in a row for the first time, and listen to this, 50 years. So the idea that Joe Donnelly was out there ripping off Medicare is not so. You ought to be glad that he said, we're not going to spend that money where it would be a waste of your money, and instead we're going to use it to close the donut hole in the drug program. That'll save $600 for seniors. And to help provide affordable health insurance for more than 30 million Americans with pre-existing conditions, say one or two other things about the Senate race while I'm on it. I don't understand how you could say your biggest thrill in life is to impose your opinion on somebody. Especially if you don't necessarily know what you're talking about. Practical person, those Indiana Hoosier Common Sense. Common sense means you look at the facts, you talk it over, you listen to everybody else, find the smartest people you can, sit down, do what seems to make common sense. If you're an ideologue, right, if you say, what Washington needs is more partisanship. That's what he said. What Washington needs is less compromise. I saw him say that after he defeated Senator Lugar. I thought he at least might have acknowledged that Dick Lugar made this country a safer, stronger place. And that's when I called Evan and I said, Evan, I believe Joe Donnelly can win this race. Because I don't believe the people of Indiana think what this country needs in Washington, D.C. is more partisanship. We've got plenty of that already. We need practical, common sense, shared solutions. state government. You know, it'll be like a cold shower for Congressman Pence if he were to become governor. Because in the state government, you don't have an option of arithmetic rules. And you can't not pass bills. You can't get reelected like you can to Congress. Apparently, you can get reelected a dozen years and never pass a bill. You can't do that with the government. And it really hurts if you say that the minimum wage is a violation of free market economics. Let me tell you, I've heard that every time I raised it, as governor and as president. And every time I did it, the economy got stronger. Why? Because if good people are working too hard for too little and don't have enough to support their kids, it is a constraint on economic growth. Something you're going to have to contend with in Indiana, because every state does. Every state in the country is having trouble funding its university system and its community colleges, its vocational schools, and its job training programs, because revenues are tight and they're trying to hold on to the public schools, and if they've got really good sense, they're doing what my friend Mr. Gregg wants to do with early childhood education. But here's something that ought to bother us all. And again, this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. At least I wouldn't think it would be. Keep in mind, Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act, and I got a loan from that to help me finish my education, and I was honored to pay it off. I don't think it was welfare. I don't think it was a waste of money. I think the country did a pretty good job. Eisenhower signed the bill to start the interstate highway system. I don't know about you, but I think it's a pretty good investment for the country. And it brought a lot of new industry to the middle of America in the heartland, and enabled us to move goods in a way we never could do before. So I think that's important. But anyway, from the passage of the GI Bill through the 1990s, America always ranked first or second in the world in the percentage of our young people who had four-year college degrees. And it was a godsend for us. Now keep in mind, not every job requires a college degree. But nearly every job in the 21st century will be created by somebody who has one. In technology, in biotechnology, all these new petroleum and natural gas engineers that figure out how to design this equipment so we can work it without wrecking the water table, and all the things that have to be done, and these new technologies that Secretary of Energy says are going to bring solar power down to 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and in just a few years it's dropped 70% in 3 years. All these things are happening. Meanwhile, what happened in the last decade? We dropped from 2nd to 16th in the world in the percentage of our young people with four-year degrees, and we're still nearly first in the percentage of our young people who go to college. What does that tell you? People are scared they can't pay the bills.